Thank you for staying with us. Well, Nigeria recently celebrated 25 years of democratic rule, marking a significant milestone in the country's journey towards political stability and economic development. The government has also implemented policies aimed at diversifying the economy, reducing its reliance on oil exports and promoting non-oil sector, such as agriculture, manufacturing. However, despite the progress made, the country continues to face numerous economic challenges that have hindered its growth and prosperity. What are the key issues requiring attention at this time? I introduced him earlier. He is the director of the Institute of Capital Market Studies at Nasarawa State University, KEFI, also the president of the Association of Capital Market Academics of Nigeria, Professor Uche Waleke. Good afternoon, Prof. It is good to see you. Barika de Salah.
Thanks so much, Tolu. Very good afternoon and compliments of the season.
Yes, Prof, it's a very big conversation looking at what has happened from 1999 to date. Democracy, development, industrial policies in Nigeria. Can you give us an overview of what you understand has played out over time before we now maybe get to some specifics and what can be done? And I want to also remind you that the president in his speech acknowledged the fact that there is a challenge at the moment. Nigerians are grappling high cost, purchasing power remains low. But he says these policy steps are very important. What do you make of it, Prof?
Yeah, thank you. I think in that speech, the president was talking about the need to begin now to focus on economic, if you like, economic democracy, from political democracy. And of course, and rightly so. If you look at the last 25 years, it's been a case of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let me start even from the good sides. What easily comes to mind, readily comes to mind, is the telecoms revolution. Before 1999, there were just less than 500,000 telephone lines. Today, we understand NCC says their number of subscription has exceeded 200 million. So that's one positive thing that has happened in the last 25 years. Another area that comes to mind is also the financial sector, where we have seen some level of stability. Recall that in 2005, we had the banking sector consolidation. And since then, one could say our banks, the banking sector has remained resilient. At least the financial soundness indicators, say so. And of course, the same 2005, we were able to exit the Paris Club debt. Before then, if you recall, we were owing the Paris Club as much as $30 billion. But in 2005, there was this debt buyback arrangement in which Nigeria was allowed to pay $18 billion in full settlement of that liability. So we exited the Paris Club debt. External debt nearly came to zero by 2005. And then, of course, you can't miss out the positive developments in the capital market since then. A lot has happened in the markets. From the number of products, before it used to be just equities and bonds. Today we have a number of products in the market. New asset classes have come on board, exchange-traded funds, including even financial derivatives. Of course, in terms of size and contribution, we've also seen some improvements. Market infrastructure too has improved. Recall that before then, it used to be the Nigerian Stock Exchange. But today, in terms of market infrastructure, we have other platforms, other exchanges, have come on board. FMDQ is one of them, NAST, including commodities exchanges. So we have seen significant improvements in the capital market. I also recall that in 1999, market capitalization then was around 294 billion naira. Today, we are talking about 56 trillion naira in terms of market capitalization. Even if you knock out the devaluation, knock out inflation, you still have a number that is reasonably way above what we had in 1999. But that appears to be all all there is to celebrate with respect to, the last 25 years. Because we've had a number of, if you like, drawbacks, even beginning with the capital market I just mentioned. In 1999, number of companies listed on the market was around 195. But today, the number of companies has shrunk to 155, about 155. Okay, so that tells you that over the last 25 years, we've seen the market has witnessed a number of, delistings. But of course, one area that Nigerians will tell you we have not done well at all, and that is what is, a big source of worry, is in the area of power, in the area of electricity. Okay, that 25 years since 1999, we are still talking about a paltry 3,000 megawatts of electricity, in terms of, electricity, generation, or even electricity, distribution in this country. Whereas in countries like South Africa, for example, we hear, numbers that run into, thousands of megawatts, 50,000 megawatts for a country of 60 million people. Now, we are 220 million, and we are still battling with 3,000 megawatts. So how can we be competitive? Okay, so power is one area we have failed in the last 25 years. The same thing goes with fuel. So energy in general. If you look at fuel, there is no reason that 25 years after we, transit into a democratic regime, we are still talking about, non-functional refineries. Okay, the 4 refineries we have today are not functioning, and that is that is nothing to write home about. So, in terms of power, in terms of refineries, we have not done well, including even transport. Look at transport infrastructure today. Where we are today ought to have been a lot, far better than what we currently have. Transport infrastructure is still weak, whether in terms of roads, rails, or ports. Okay, we are yet to get where we ought to be. So if you look at all this, you would agree with me that we have a long way to go. We haven't really done. Yes, there are the good sides which I mentioned, but if you weigh it on balance, it's more like the cup. The cup is 3/4 empty, and then 1/4 full. So we've had more of downsides than upsides, in my view.
Also, this argument in some quarters that Nigeria doesn't really lack policies or initiatives that can help revamp the economy, but many say proper implementation has always been the challenge. If you to look back at some policies instituted, at least I'm very much aware of the economic growth and recovery plan that we had at the time. We also had an economic development plan, I think, after COVID and all of this. So if we look at a series of this and those that have even been before now, have we properly implemented them? Do we get to monitor and evaluate and at the end of the day see that we get positives from these policies instituted?
Yeah, Tola, I'm sure you know the answer. The answer is that we have not properly implemented those policies for obvious reasons. In my view, the 4-year election cycle that we currently operate is a major impediment. Impediment in the sense that a chief executive comes into office after the first 2 years. The next thing he or she begins to bother about is how to win re-election. So you now realize that some of those policies we have in those documents don't get implemented, and worse still, when it is a new set. By a new set, I mean a new a different political party. So that different political party will not have the tendency or inclination to continue with projects of initiated by previous administration. So that has been the bane of our country in the last 25 years. Whether you're talking about the needs, remember the needs document of the Obasanjo years, needs, seats and leads, or the 7-point agenda of Yaradua, or even the Vision 2020 I think we had under the Jonathan administration. And then Buhari era came with economic recovery and growth plan. And currently, we of course inherited also the National Development Plan. If you look at all of that, you find that you find common string running through them in terms of what needs to be done. But at the end of the day, the challenge will always remain in implementation. Now, if you also look at I was talking about the downsides. Now, these downsides also include the fact that we've had faulty fiscal policies. Whether in terms of revenue, for example, we have been over relying on, again, oil proceeds for over 60% of our revenue. In terms of spending, okay, so again, spending hasn't been done right. For the last 25 years, we have had at least over 60% of our spend on recurrent, whereas the capital expenditure has usually been less than 30% in actual. Okay, so when you have that kind of imbalance in terms of recurrent and capital, of course you won't expect that you move very forward in terms of development. And even when you come to the capital, what is called capital spend, the proportion to that is meant for developmental spend is very little. Okay, and this has not been helped by the fact that over the last 25 years, again, especially since 2005 when we exited the Paris Club debt I mentioned, we've also started accumulating debts. Okay, so today you can see where the public debt stock is in terms of number, in hundreds of trillion naira in terms of size of our public debt. And when you now even disaggregate that into external and domestic, what readily comes to mind is that in the last 25 years, again, we have not used, particularly for domestic debt, we have not used the right instrument in borrowing. We have relied on the FGM bonds, which is accounting for over 70% of the instrument, and used less of infrastructure bonds. If you look at the structure of our domestic debt profile today, you will find that the infrastructure component of that, which essentially, we're referring to the Sukuk. The Sukuk bonds you have there, represents less than 3% of the entire, money we have borrowed from domestic sources. And when you have that kind of structure, of course, you should also expect that it will have negative impact on development because you have not borrowed for infrastructure. You have not actually borrowed for developmental purposes, which is why, I would suggest that going forward, we should pay more attention to infrastructure bonds when we are borrowing. We should use more of Sukuk. I was looking at the Sukuk figure, so far that we have done, just around less than $800 billion, 800 billion naira. But if you go around this country today, I'm sure you find, projects here and there being funded by Sukuk. So that tells you what the Sukuk can do. If 800 billion can do those kinds of projects all over, imagine if you were to double or triple that kind of money, in infrastructure, bonds. So fiscal policy, we need to get that right. The structure of the economy too, we also need to get right. Again, it's sad to note that 25 years after we transited to a civilian regime, we are still, the real sectors of the economy, the productive sectors, the agriculture and industry, manufacturing, are still, struggling. Okay? If you look at the National Bureau of Statistics report, it is very clear that the economy is being powered by the services sector. Okay? It is not for nothing that the agri sector is called the primary sector of the economy. The manufacturing sector is called the secondary sector of an economy. Services sector, the tertiary sector. But in a situation where the primary sector is not growing, the secondary sector is not growing, it's only the services sector, that is growing. Okay, it's akin to somebody trying to do university before doing primary and secondary school. Of course, there will be a problem there, and that's unfortunately is our own case in Nigeria today. So we need to pay closer attention to the agri sector and the manufacturing sector because these are the primary and productive sectors, and even that is also where the jobs are, and not in the services sector. Look at what is happening today. The banking sector is growing. Okay, in fact, last NBS report, banking sector grew by over 32%, whereas agri sector was doing less than 2%. Ditto for manufacturing, less than 3%. So you find a situation in which the financial sector of the economy is disconnected from the productive sectors of the economy. So in that kind of situation, what would you expect? Of course, you would expect that, of course, jobs wouldn't be growing, okay, because the sectors that actually power the economy, in terms of job elasticity, okay, are not as elastic as you have in these other productive, sectors. So I think we need to do something about our productive capacities, the structure of the Nigerian economy, and also fiscal policy, which is why I'm happy today that the Taiwo Oyedele's committee, is addressing some of that, especially, the committee is on fiscal policy and tax reforms. So I'm aware that a number of recommendations they have made in the, in their report, if implemented, in my view, I have no doubt that the fiscal landscape of this country, will change for good.
Prof, before we wrap up this conversation, let's now stay with the present administration that has taken the bull by the horn, like experts like you have said, taking some very bold steps in the removal of subsidy. It's a common knowledge. And of course, opening up of the foreign exchange market. And we see the fallout of this, and there's a lot of mixed reactions everywhere. Yeah, let's put it that way. So when do you think that Nigerians will, let me put it that way, when would they sing a new song following at this time that they have to tighten their belts?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me put it this way. You see, when you read books on development and how countries have developed over time, development economics books, let me just cite two of them that I've read. I've had reason to read them over and over. One is the one by Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, from third world to first world, the story of Singapore. I will recommend that to you, Tolu. The other one is the Korean Miracle, 1962 to 1980 by Kwam King. It's also a story of Korea. So when you read those books, and other books too, to do with how, especially these Asian tigers, have emerged, you'll find that they have also used the right fiscal policies. In terms of borrowing, for example, they have also borrowed right. Okay, South Korea, if you read that book, you realize that South Korea borrowed a lot and invested in iron and steel. And today, South Korea, you can see the cars, a lot of cars, coming from that angle. Let me summarize this way, Tolu, because of time. The economy is like a car, okay? And a car, I always make the argument, it's like a car, and a car needs to be designed, okay? How do you design a car? A very important component of a car is the engine. If the engine is not there, of course, the car will never move. And what is the engine in the case of an economy? It is power, okay? We need to get the power sector reforms right, okay? We need to do something about power. Until we fix power, okay, every other thing will hardly work. Now, after talking about power, you also bother about the tires of the car. What are the tires of the economy? Transport. And when we talk about transport, we are referring to roads, ports, and rails. Again, these things are very critical. Then, you also bother about the fuel you put in the car. And what is that fuel? The petrol, the diesel, okay, that we also have. That's why we also have to fix our refineries. Then, you of course talk about if you want to drive an SUV, then you must, in an economy, you must talk about the steel, iron and steel, and then ICT. These are the ones that will make you, drive a big car. And of course, who are the ones that will drive the car? That's when you begin to talk about education, okay, human capital development, namely education and health. Now, these are what we call enablers. If you don't get these things right, the infrastructure, every other thing you're doing will be, amount to waste of time. And that's why when I see development plans, okay, even if you check the one we have now, National Development Plan, it starts with, GDP and the rest. That's not how to start a development plan. In developing a plan, if you read these countries that I've told you now, read their stories, they start with these enablers. A development plan must start with the enablers. When you get the enablers right, then you can talk about agriculture. Because you need power, you need transport to be able to, get agriculture right. If you don't have power, if you don't have transport, your chances of succeeding in agriculture, will be weak. If you don't have power, you don't have transport, your chance of succeeding in solid minerals in other sectors of the economy will be weak. So these enablers must be there, okay? And that's why we often say it's the duty of the government to provide enablers. The private sector will now be, come in to be the engine of economic growth. So that's the way to look at an economy. It has to be well designed, and that design is what we usually find in a plan. And I'm saying that in our own plan, we have to also, sequence it properly, such that the enablers will be the ones to support whatever you are building, on top of that. Look at the case of agriculture, for example. We talk about inflation, okay? And you just finished a discussion with my colleague, my friend, Professor Ken Ife, okay? And in that conversation, it was very clear that food is where the pressure is. The pressure point is on food. And the best way, to also address that is to provide these enablers, transport. Part of why food is expensive today is also because of transport. That's why you also find this disparity between inflation figures, across states. Before goods are moved from one point to another, okay, by the time you add the cost of transport, then it compounds the situation. And that's why I talked about, these enablers, all right? So when you get agriculture right, inflation, of course, will naturally come down. But again, I want to close on this final analysis, that in comparing regimes, okay, in the last 25 years, it's not about inflation. It's not about unemployment. It's not about GDP. For me, these are numbers. Okay, what should matter is we should go beyond these numbers, which, in my view, can be manipulated. You can manipulate your GDP. Tomorrow we can rebase and say our GDP is this. Inflation, we can change the methodology and we begin to get, some numbers. Okay, the same thing with unemployment. Look at what happened in unemployment the other day. We changed the methodology and unemployment suddenly fell from 3.3 to now 5%. So that's why I'm saying these things are just numbers. We should go beyond them to the real issues. And what are these real issues? Number of jobs. So instead of saying unemployment rate is this, we should be able to say this number of jobs have been created. Okay, this access to electricity, access to health. Okay, these are the number of refineries built. These are some of the indices we should be using in measuring, how regimes have performed.
Interesting way to live it. I've been speaking with the director of the Institute of Capital Market Studies at Nasarawa State University, KEFI. He's also the president of the Association of Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria, Professor Uche Uwaleke. Enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for your time as usual.
Thank you so much, Tolu.